Mr. Hauserman, we just came from a reading of a play this afternoon, and we heard that you had some comments to say about the way that was presented.
The idea of the play, the idea of the book. The play was called Ocean in a Teacup. It was actually named and drawn up after the copy of a book called Ocean in a Teacup, which is more or less the story of a great Indian teacher named Sri Sri Thakur Anukul Chandra. And the musical is an attempt to embody the teachings of that teacher and the stories of some of the disciples and the way he taught them. And one of those disciples was myself. When I met Thakur in 1945, it was after the war, the Second World War, in which I had spent 2 years in Burma with the, as a member of the American Field Service, attached to different Indian Army infantry divisions, the 5th Division, the 17th Division, others.
Cut.
The point we want to get across in this musical is the issue of love, what it means when a spiritual teacher talks about love and expects anyone to learn to live by love. And during the years with Thakur, the first few years were inspiring and easy and loving, and in spite of all the problems. But there came a time when he told me the story of how his mother had treated him in childhood very demandingly and what we would call almost ruthlessly, cruelly. And though he had done everything for her, and she became the leader of the religious movement, and he said she'd never praised him. And I said, Thakur, your mother never praised you in your life? He said, only once, and that was just before she left the world. She called me and said, you fulfilled all my hopes. And then she died, so I could never really enjoy it. And I felt very bad, and I said, boy, your mother was cruel. And he became very upset and said very intensely, you can think what you like or say what you like, but if my mother hadn't been the way she was, I couldn't have become what I am. And he said it was so intensely, I felt I'd overstepped my the bounds between a disciple and a guru, and I backed off. And then he suddenly looked at me and said, if I could behave this way with you, you'd quickly grow into a man. And not thinking, I said, of course, I'll go ahead and do it. After all, that's why I'm here. And he said, the problem is, there's one great problem. And I said, what? He said, you won't be able to handle it. You'll run away. And then I said, well, if I run away, I run away. I came to you to learn to become a man. And if I can't handle it, I can't handle it. What's the use of playing games? And that was the end of it. So then he said to me, nothing happened for about 2 weeks, and then suddenly one day when there was a big crowd around him, he suddenly said to me, hey, you wrecked this one Jeep, you drove it without oil? And I said, I wrecked the Jeep, I haven't touched the Jeep. And he said, Bhupesh told me. I said, what do you listen to Bhupesh for? If he complains because I taught a lot of people to drive and he felt his job is threatened. Thakur said, I will listen to Bhupesh. And look, see, I hardly touch your ego, and look how it jumps. I saw Thakur, it will jump. When you use Bhupesh, you can do anything you want, it won't bother me, but when you use Bhupesh, that makes me bad. He said, I will use him, and if he doesn't complain, I'll put people behind you. So the drama began. The drama began in what he called me becoming a man, but what I called in the long run learning to love without expectation. That's the fact. Anyway, the rest of the drama continued. A few months later, always in front of a large group, he suddenly called me, very gravely from behind the group, and said, hey, come up here. And when I came up, he said very loudly, you know what happens when you lie, don't you? And I was sort of shocked. And he said, you become irresponsible, you become unreliable, even your own thoughts you can't rely on to yourself, and so on. Anyway, the effect of that little comment publicly was that a rumor spread through the whole ashram that Hauserman was a liar. Thakur had nailed him in the midst of a lie, and I lost so many friends. Things went on peacefully for a long time until 3 or 4 months later, he suddenly called me, and he said, you know what happens when you're treacherous, don't you? So, again, the same thing started, and again, the same repercussions. And in the period of about 2 or 3 years, always publicly, always very strongly, intensely, Thakur had said to me, you know what happens when you're treacherous, you know what happens when you're a liar, you know what happens when you're a lecherous, you know what happens when you steal, you know what happens when you commit sodomy. Well, the last one sort of shook everything. By then I had no friends left in the ashram. No one wanted to talk to me except a handful of people. When I'd go to the tea shop, they'd move away from me. In fact, I was isolated. The only person I could stay with was with Thakur. All through this, when we were alone together, he was very intimate, very loving, but publicly it would appear that I was a public enemy, and many people even thought of stories of driving me out of the ashram. And I just, I hung on because I felt, well, Thakur's testing me, let me see if I can go. But when he came to this issue of sodomy and so on, I went to him one night, and Thakur, I don't know why you're saying this, I never committed this sodomy in my life. And he said, well, maybe for you, it may be someone else, it may be a warning, and left it at that. But no public explanation. Well, as these months, and actually it was several years went by, I had no friends left. I would go to the tea shop, people would move away and stop talking when I sat there. I'd come back to Thakur, and Thakur would say, where have you been? And I'd say, where have I got to go? You created such a situation here, there's nobody left that I can talk to. And he'd laugh. He didn't seem bothered at all. So I kept moving around with him. I'd fix his shoes, I'd stay by him, I'd take notes, I'd write up, translate stuff for him, do a lot of the local affairs that were in trouble for him. And then no one left to do, so I'd move around. When it was hot, I'd hold the umbrella over his head when we moved from place to place. And one day doing that, I suddenly said, you know, Thakur, staying with you, I'm becoming useless. And without breaking stride, he just said, then there's the possibility of you becoming useful. Now these were going on through many, many months. It got to a point where I felt and knew I had no one left in the ashram. No one left who was interested in me. In fact, most of them hated my guts. The only person I had left was Thakur, and I thought at times, this is a desperate situation, and I thought, let me see how far it goes, I'll hang on. Though I must admit at times it was like hanging on by your fingernails. Anyway, I stayed that way and held on, and through all sorts of circumstances, and one day I had achieved a very remarkable adjustment with some local people, and I thought, well, I'll tell Thakur this will make him happy. When I went to tell him, I could hardly get the words out of my mouth before he looked at me and said, you are so mean, so nasty, so petty. And I started to turn around and leave. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to the room. He said, sit down. So I sat down. And I waited until the conversations went on. He was talking with a lot of people from Assam, among them their big leader, who was a great devotee of Thakur and of Borda, mainly Borda. And they were all well dressed, and I was sort of in my broken down clothes, and I was sneaked around in the back. My room was right next to Thakur, so I climbed through the window into my room, and I thought, I have to do something. The only way, it's obvious Thakur doesn't understand that I'm doing a lot of good things here. If he could once appreciate that, he'd be a little more loving. So I went back to him and I said, Thakur, I have one question. When your mother was so nasty to you, did you ever feel that sometimes it'd be, if you went away, she'd miss you? She'd realize what you do? And he looked at me glanced at me, and there was a millionth of a second, a little twinkle in his eye, almost to remind me that this was a game, and then said, look, my mother was my existence. No matter what she did, love me or hate me, I couldn't leave my own existence. And that's the way it was when I came outside. When I came outside, this big headman of the Assam group came up to me and he said, Hauserman, I have to say one thing. There's nobody I know in the ashram with whom Thakur is so familiar and so friendly. You're really blessed. And then I said to him, suddenly it dawned on me that all the bitterness, all the hatred, there was some deeper meaning in all this. What the word of love really means. And I said to him at the time, I said, Rovida, you know, you can also have that intimacy. Anyone can have the intimacy. But you know what has to happen? We have to change. You have to change from trying to make Thakur cut him to your size. You have to try to grow to his size. He says, I don't understand what you mean. He was sort of, his ego was a little pinched. And I said, well, you go out and you speak in all these meetings about Thakur, how much he loves everyone he does, how many miracles he creates, that also he does. But you know what he wants? He wants to make us to become like him. And all we want to do is tell how great he is and live off the glory of that and have people tell us we're great disciples. That's what I mean by cutting him down to our size so it pleases our ego. And what he would like to do is to cut us apart and have us grow so that we're expanding until we become like him. And that's the whole basis, the whole difference in the whole thing. Suddenly to just let go. And you know, he walked away. He wasn't interested. Spence, my old friend, said sometime later, he said, sometimes I think you and Thakur have a private understanding. And I said, it's a private understanding that anyone can have, but nobody wants it. All we want to do is live in the glow of his love, live in his affection, live in the things he can do, tell about the miracles he does. That makes us famous by talking about it. What he wants is to cut us down, harsh us, smash our ego until we can evolve. We can begin to love him until there's nothing left except to love him, and then we begin to grow into his shape. Because that's the road he went on with his mother. That's the road he wants to have us lead on. That's the road he's trying to do with me, and he'll do with you, with anyone. Well, many people walked away from it. But I'll tell you this, over those years, those 2 or 3 years, I caught a glimpse of what Thakur meant by love. And I've realized I was with him for 25 years, I've been preaching about him for another 25 years, so 50 years has gone by. But the nothing that I realize is more vital than any one of us, the only thing that anyone can teach anyone, whether it's our wife or our parents or our children, is that we can love and have no expectation left in it. Thakur could smash me because a day came when I had nothing left. They all hated me, everyone was friend, but I thought, there's nothing he can do now. I love him. He can't take that away from me, man. No matter what he does, I can go on loving him. I don't have to depend on him to love him. I don't have to depend on anyone else to love him. I don't have to depend on money or food or prestige. I can love him because the capacity to love is mine out, and I can put it all for him. And you know what I realized? That was the key message of Thakur that I learned through this whole thing. That's the message of, I feel, the message of Thakur. And you know the beauty of it? It is also the message of Christ. Because he said the whole of the prophet, what is it? The whole of the prophets in the book is in that one phrase. Seek the Lord your God with all your mind and heart and strength. And then love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, and strength, and then your neighbor is yourself. That all we have to do is put everything we have into his hands. Everything. Don't worry about how much you get insulted unjustly. Don't worry about how much you get thrashed or kicked aside unjustly. Just go on loving him. And when you go on loving him, yourself becomes that, his. And when yourself becomes his, you see yourself in everyone. And so automatically you're going to love your neighbor yourself. That's not only the message of Christ, that was the message of Thakur. And if anything could come through in this ocean in a teacup, my dream, my prayer is that this message come through. That we're born, from the moment we're born, with that capacity to love without calculation. And if we can exercise it, unlock it, and direct it to the highest and noblest being we know, then we're going to grow into that highest and noblest being, but not without pain and anguish and getting insulted, getting thrashed, being isolated, being alone. But if we hang on through that, we're ultimately gaining that peace that passes understanding. We're also going to gain whatever every religion, Jewish, Christian, Islam, Hindu, teaches, that we are made in the image of God and that our goal in life is to become God-like. Amen, brother, amen.
Oh.
Okay? My prayer with Joel and Neil is that all the miracles of Thakur are wonderful, all the beautiful stories about how he adjusted other people are wonderful, but unless that message comes across to each of us in our relations with our parents or our spouses or our children, that we go on loving them no matter what they do, and in the process of going on loving without that expectation, that we grow toward God. That's the message that we have to get across. That's the message of Thakur's life. Amen. Okay. And I hope that's the message in
Now.
And I hope that's the message of not only life, but I hope that's the message Thakur's blessing sits on Neil and Joel's brain, and it comes through with the people who play the parts in this. That it's a capacity to love is in our hands, to love without any desires or expectations, and even if we get kicked around, we'll go on loving. And if that message gets across, so that we do that with our own families, our spouses, our children, then the message of Ocean and Teacup will be the message of the future for everyone. Amen.